Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm sharing a Prismacolor pencil tutorial using the new House Mouse Designs Sunflower Walk collection. This stamp here is the Sunflower Walk stamp, and I love the fact that each one of these House Mouse Designs stamps has several different sentiments that go perfectly with that image. This is the Fun in the Sun stamp set. Absolutely adorable. House Mouse Design stamps are always absolutely adorable. You can never go wrong with them. This is the Cherry on Top stamp set. So we are going to be using these stamps with this Jubilee 6-inch pad. This is some printed papers here. I'm using them for my color inspiration, but I'm also going to be using them for different mats on the different cards. I just thought these were just adorable papers, perfect for summer and spring. And that one with the stripes, to me, that looks like a beach sunset. So I'm going to be doing some fussy cutting with that Fun in the Sun image once it's done being colored, and put that paper behind it for an easy background. The cardstock that I like to use when coloring with Prismacolor pencils is Bristol smooth cardstock, and I'm going to be stamping with some black StazOn ink, so that works perfect with the Prismacolor pencils as well. So I'm using my Misty stamping tool so that I can stamp the image a couple times to make sure that I have a nice crisp image. This way, when I go to stamp it, I can stamp it in exactly the same place. I don't have to worry about my cardstock or my paper shifting on me or trying to match something up. So I am going to ink that stamp up with StazOn ink, make sure that it's fully inked, fully covered with that ink. And then typically I usually miss an area, or there's an area that's not quite as dark. It's usually typically towards the center of that because I haven't pressed quite far enough or quite hard enough. Now, to clean that StazOn ink off of that stamp, I use some Ultra Clean. I find this is the easiest, as well as the fact that it doesn't have the smell that StazOn Cleaner has to it. I can mist it right on there and take it right off. The one thing about Ultra Clean, though, it kind of has an oily finish to it. So when I'm using it on stencils that I've used permanent ink on, or embossing folders that I've used permanent ink on, I do go, after I've used Ultra Clean, I use some just water and dish soap or hand soap just to clean off that oily residue. I don't really find that it affects the stamps that much. It kind of conditions them, but I do find that when it comes to stencils or embossing folders, I want to get that residue off of there before I put it away so that I don't forget it's there for my next use. So I'm going to be stamping all three of my images at the same time, and I'm doing a sentiment with each one of them. I'm also going to be coloring them all at the same time. You could do them individually if you want, but I find that it makes it a little bit quicker to do them all at the same time, because if I'm using yellow with one image and I want yellow on several of the other images, I can use that color at the same time and color all of the yellow areas that I want colored. So as I'm doing this stamping, I'm cleaning my stamps as I'm going so that they're nice and clean before putting them back in the package. StazOn ink is fabulous. It's a nice permanent ink. I sometimes use it for watercolor as well because it is permanent. I tend to prefer to heat emboss with watercolor, but it is a nice permanent ink. However, you don't want to leave it sitting on your stamps because, especially with clear stamps, it can start to break down that stamp. So you want to get into a habit of making sure you clean your stamps well before you put them away, especially when you're using a permanent ink like this. So I'm stamping all of the images, making sure that I have nice coverage. If there's any area that's a little bit lighter when I stamp it the first time, I'll ink my stamp up and just make sure to press in that area to make sure that I have a nice crisp image. For my coloring, I'm using some Prismacolor Premier pencils. I have a set that has, I think it's 72 in this set. You could use a smaller set if you wanted, and then you could blend colors together because they do color on top of each other well. I don't typically find that I need to do that, but it is an option. Once I'm done coloring in all of my images, I'm going to be using some Gamsol with a paper stump in order to blend that color. So when you're coloring with the pencils, you don't have to make sure that you're coloring absolutely perfect, because that Gamsol and the paper stump are going to blend everything out. It's going to blend out any pencil lines. And if you happen to have two colors that blend together on an image, like for instance, for that sunflower, I'm going to be doing pink into yellow for the petals. For that umbrella, I'm going to be doing green into yellow. You can easily blend two colors into together with that Gamsol. After doing that first yellow color, didn't write down the actual colors that I use. I'm pausing them on the screen so that you can see what the pencil color number is. And obviously you can change up these colors to be what you want them to be. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. I'm using a magenta pink type color and going to do that in the base of the flower as well as the tube of our little sunscreen here. Now I chose to do the pink as the base of the flower because I tend to like non-traditional colors for things. So I thought it would be really pretty to have that sunflower have some pink base to the petals as well, and then go out to yellow. Another option there would be to do some orange or like a rusty color, I think would be pretty as well. But I do think it adds that extra little bit of detail to the flower. So once I'm done doing that tube of sunscreen there, I can go on to my third image. I'm going to color that cherry as well as the candle and one of the birthday hats. I have some pink here that I'm going to be using for the noses or the faces of our little mice, as well as the inner ears, the tails, the hands, and the feet. Now you can see how quick and easy it is to color it in when you're just doing all three images at once. And I'll keep those pencil crayons that I'm using off to the side so that if I by chance miss an area, because I quite often do, I can easily know exactly which shades I used and pick it up for coloring in that area. Now, again, you don't have to be perfect when you're coloring because that Gamsol is going to take any imperfections out of the coloring, especially like pencil marks from that you get when you're coloring with pencil crayons. It will totally smooth that out. Now I'm using very few colors here. I'm not using a ton of them. You can obviously use more if you wanted to add a lot more shading to it. A lot of these areas are fairly small though, so there's not a whole lot of area to get shading in. For the leaves and the stem for the sunflower, I only colored where I wanted the color to be darkest on that stem. When I go to use the Gamsol with the paper stump, I'm going to start where that color is on the stem, and then I'm going to just blend it out. So we're going to have some color right on my paper stump left over, and that is going to color the light side of that stem. Another option would be to use 2 shades of green if you wanted, but this is a really easy way to get some color blending and some shading very, very easily. Now I'm using Prismacolor pencils on this set of House Mouse Designs cards. I've used House Mouse Designs cards or stamps for cards on many different videos. So I also love to use Copic markers with them to color them. And I also like to do watercoloring with them. So there's other ways you can color them. It doesn't have to be Prismacolor pencils, but they are fun to use. And I love the different detail you can get with Prismacolor pencils. Another option that you can do after you've used the Gamsol is take your pencils and add extra details to those stamped images. I tend to prefer using things like glossy accents and stickles to add extra texture and extra detail. But it is another option if you want some line detail in there, is to, after you're using your Gamsol and your paper stump, after you've blended everything out, to use another paper or another pencil to add some line detail to it. Now for the background well actually I colored it on all 3 cards, but I am only going to be blending it on 2 of the cards. I just used a pale blue for the sky or for the background. Again, you could use other colors as well. And typically when I do backgrounds, I like to have a hint of color. I don't color the entire thing. I don't personally like the entire background color, but you absolutely could if you wanted. I just put a pale blue there, but you could do it in whatever color you're wanting. It's just to add the suggestion or the hint of color to the background, just so it's not an image floating in space. And I do the same thing for the ground. I typically choose like a brown or a gray and just start where the surface where the mice are standing, start there, and then just kind of blend my way out, color my way out so that I have a hint of a surface that they're standing on or that they're sitting on. And then I blend that color out really quickly and easily, and I don't go all the way to the edges. Just a personal preference thing. Again, you could go all the way to the edges if that's your preference. The other thing that I like to do with the mice is I'll do a different variety of browns and grays for them. I don't want them all to be exactly the same color. When I'm coloring the mice, I am darker around the outside edges and then lighter towards the center so that we have some shading as well as highlighting on there. For some of the areas, like they say the cupcake icing, there's not really a whole lot of area there to do highlighting and shading. So I'll just kind of color the entire thing. In this case, I did an ombre from yellow icing to the green icing, but you can do just heavier amounts of that coloring or darker coloring and then lighter coloring. Change the pressure on your Prismacolor pencil as you're coloring to get different shades of that same color. When it comes to blending, I have different paper stumps in different sizes. Smaller ones, I'll use a smaller paper stump. Larger areas, I'll use a larger paper stump. I have a piece of sandpaper to the side there. This one is 400 grit. It's just what I had in my craft room. And what I use that for is if I'm going from one color to the other, I will wipe my paper stump on that sandpaper to remove any pigment that is on the end of that paper stump. And I will also typically go from lighter colors to darker colors. So I started with the yellow. I still will use that sandpaper to take any of that yellow pigment off of my paper stump. And then I will go into a darker shade. This is the other reason why I like to work on several different images at a time. I'll do all of the greens on all 3 images, so I don't need to sand that paper stump down quite as much. I will do all of the yellow for all of the images. I'll just do all of that same color. If I have different colors or different shades of a color, I'll start at the lightest shade and I'll work my way darker. Now, as I said before, when it came to the leaves and the stem to the sunflower, I only colored where I wanted that color to be darkest. So when it came to blending, I went and I started where that color was on the stem, blended that out, and then whatever pigment was left on my paper stump was used to blend that lighter area. You can see I have a bowl there with my Gamsol in it. Just makes it really easy to dip that paper stump in there. Once I'm done, there will definitely be some Gamsol left there, so I'll just put it right back into the bottle. It can be used again. You don't have to just take out how much you're going to use. You can easily put it right back into the bottle, pour it back in there, and save it for your next use. As I'm going through it, you can see it's really quick to blend those areas out. And by using that sandpaper, I can make sure that I'm not contaminating one area with the pigment from another one. When it comes to coloring or blending that sky, you do want to be careful, because if by chance I am blending near an area that has a darker color to it, say like the brown from a mouse, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally touch the end of that paper stump into that pigment and then smear it across my sky. And it's really easy to do if you happen to get a little bit too close. Another option would be to do the sky and the ground first before coloring and then blending the image areas. I'll typically do them all at the same time though. You just want to make sure that you are extra careful with it. And blending it goes quite easy or quite quickly, just like coloring it, because I'm mixing and matching and moving from one image to the other and just doing the blending on the same color that is in the 3 images. Now I'm doing House Mouse Designs images here. Obviously, this also works with other images as well. I do find that it kind of gives you a bit of a zen moment when you're doing the blending, because it's amazing watching any of those pencil marks come out of your coloring area. I always love watching to see how smoothly it blends. When it comes to the mice, like I said before, I go and I color darker around the outside edges, lighter towards their bellies where you would naturally have a highlight. But when it comes to blending, I'll go the opposite way. I'll start where there's the lighter area, or it's colored lighter, and then I'll work my way to the area that's colored darker. That way I'm not accidentally moving that darker pigment or darker color into the lighter area and then removing that highlight. I want to make sure that we still have that lighter area there. Here I'm blending the sky, and this is where I'm just going really, really lightly, making sure that I don't accidentally get the end of that paper stump and touch the image. If by chance you do touch the image, you can take some of that pigment off of your paper stump and kind of just blend that color out a little bit and remove that excess color, blend it into the sky and remove it. I don't think you're going to get it out completely, totally. And typically when you do that, you don't get a ton of color, but obviously it's not something that you want to do. You want to make sure that you keep it nice and pristine. So as I'm working here, I did the sky, and now I'm working on the ground that they're standing on. I did the ground the same color for all of them, as well as the sky the same color. Again, you can completely change that up. I chose a color for the sand for the beach one, and that's where I just used it for the other 2 as well. I figured it would work for whatever. Obviously the cupcake one could be inside, so you could do any color for that. It could be any color counter, carpet, any color surface that you wanted it to be. If you wanted to add a pop of color, you could do that there. I typically like my color though to be in my image pieces. Now that I'm done blending all of them, I'm going to fussy cut around the little guy here that is walking in the sand. This is because I'm going to put that printed paper behind it. Fussy cutting is one of those things that it's not always the funnest thing to do, but it's really, really effective. Now, because our little mice have hair on them, obviously it's going to make it a little bit more challenging for that fussy cutting. What I like to do is stamp on the surface that I'm going to be gluing them on so that all of those little hairs will be stamped on there. I don't have to worry about fussy cutting each one of those hairs individually. It just makes it a little bit easy, a little bit more forgiving, so you don't need to be as precise with all of those little fuzzy hairs that have on them. So that is, when you're fussy cutting around here, just do the simple shapes rather than going around each one of those little bits of hair that is on the body. So I did use my stamped image in order to position my stamp here. I'm just going to be using some black Memento ink to stamp on this paper because it's just to get those lines, give it a little bit of an area for, or give me an idea of where I'm going to be gluing my fussy cut piece on there. It doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to be super dark. And also we get that detail from the little hairs on them. Once I have that stamped, and I only stamped it once, you could absolutely stamp it multiple times if you wanted that image to be a bit darker. I figured just once was enough. I can use my glue, and I'm using Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle to glue that onto that printed paper. Then I set that aside and let that dry for a few minutes. Now, to step these cards up just a little bit, rather than using plain A2 card bases, I'm going to create shaped cards with them. So for this guy here, I'm using the Essential Arches die, and we're going to cut it once with the printed paper. Then I'm also going to cut it twice with some white cardstock for my card base. I'm also going to be using the Playful Stitched Panels die set for my little mice with the sunflower. I'm going to cut that out. I've done some of the fussy cutting off screen, and I'm doing some of it on screen for the little images. I'm doing different shaped cards for each one of them because it would be boring if they were all exactly the same shape. For the cupcake trio here, or the cupcake mice, I'm using the Mirrored Arch label die sets. So all of these sets here have a bunch of different sizes to them, and I chose the size that worked best with the image. Some of them are the next size down, some of them are several sizes down. I want to make sure that we see as much of that printed paper as possible. Because I colored and I chose my colors based on those printed papers, I want to make sure that we see them on our cards. So here are my two white pieces for the arch die here. My arch die that I used for my printed piece is just the next size down, so we'll see a little bit of white around the outside edges. For the card base, I use my score pal and I score it about a ½ inch from the top. Sometimes it's 3/4 of an inch. It just really depends on the shape, which size works best to score a little bit down. For the outside of this piece here, I thought it would be nice to have a gray outline, but I didn't want to add an extra layer with gray cardstock. Using the chisel end of a Copic marker makes it super easy to add a faux layer. And this is especially great if you use Copic markers for coloring, because you can choose whatever color works for what colors you chose to color your image in. It's just an easy way to add a faux layer. It makes it look like you've got another layer on there, but you absolutely don't. And for this card, I think it framed it in really nicely. I thought the white just kind of was a little bit blah, so adding that extra little bit of gray around the outside framed it really, really nicely. For the next card, I'm going to be using the one that is die cut with the Mirrored Arch label die set. I once again use my score pal to score about a ½ inch from the top edge. Then we can add the different layers to the front of the card. So the scored part of the card is usually the back of the card. I want to keep the score off of the front of my card. For this one, I use some anchor cardstock to create the next layer down, so that we do have that gray outline, but I'm not using the Copic marker on this one. I am using some gray cardstock. So sometimes it works well to use cardstock. Sometimes it works well to use that marker. That marker eliminates layers. So it's a great way to create a faux layer on something. And also reduces weight. So if you happen to have a card where you've got a lot of layers or a lot of weight on there, it's a great way to reduce weight to it if you like to mail out cards. For my last card, this is the one that I'm using the Playful Stitch Panels die set. I'm going to also create a base with those with 2 of that cardstock piece. Then I'm going to add my printed paper to the top of it. Those printed papers are just really, really thin, so they're definitely not suitable for creating a card base with them. You definitely want to be using some thicker cardstock suitable for a card base with that. And I use white cardstock because it's the most economical. You could, if you wanted, use colored cardstock. For instance, with this one, because we're not seeing any of that on the front, I just figured there's no point. For a lot of cards, I just like to have that white frame around them. I use the Copic marker on this one as well. This way we can create a frame with that gray on there without adding an extra layer, as well as the fact that for this die set, the layers were quite a large, they're not even layers, and there was quite a big difference in the sizes. So to go down the next size, I would have had to be cutting off some of my image for the sunflower guy, and I don't want to do that. So by using that Copic marker, I can add that faux layer without cutting off any of my image. Now, like I said earlier, I like to use stickles and glossy accents to add extra texture to my colored images. Sometimes I feel, even though we've got a lot of color here, sometimes I feel that they just are a little bit flat because we have ink that doesn't have any texture to it. We have the Prismacolor pencils that all has the same texture. So by adding stickles, we can add some sparkle to different areas. And then I like to use glossy accents on the eyes, especially of the mice, because it gives them that domed, glossy, beady little eye look. And then I'll usually add it to other areas. So on my little sunscreen one, I added the glossy accents to the sunscreen that's coming out of the tube. Once I'm done doing that glossy accents, I do often need to clean it up, especially around the eyes, because some of these guys have really, really tiny eyes and you get a little bit too much of that glossy accents. And I just use a dye pick in order to help to clean that up. It makes it really easy, and you definitely want to be doing that while it's nice and liquid. That way we get a nice clean result to it. The last step here is I'm using a silver gel pen to write the name on that tube. I wanted that to be a little bit of a different texture as well. So here we have our finished and dried cards. You can see how that stickles in the center of the sunflower there just adds that extra little bit of sparkle. The cards stand up really nicely, and this is just a great way to create a handmade item, but by creating shaped cards with them, you create something that's a little bit unexpected and something you don't necessarily find in the store, and they're really quite easy to create a shaped card base with it. We've got lots of color here thanks to the printed papers, and the images are colored with the colors from those printed papers. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in that description box below. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.